How you doing, everyone? So, I did want to do a reaction to this yesterday, but I wasn't able to. I have watched it, I have thought about it, and I love politics, so of course I'm going to get into this. You know, this is arguably one of the most important elections there has been in a very, very, very long time. So, yeah, let's see how this goes. I'll save my judgment till last. Let's just get on.
By the smallest of margins, essentially tied in the polls nationally and in the key battlegrounds, including right here in Pennsylvania, all still very much in play. The ABC News presidential debate starts right now.
This is an ABC News.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far. Like, let's be really clear. At this point, most voters in the United States have made up their mind. They know who they're going to vote for. This is like basically theater at this point. It's a performance. They're trying to get up like a few percentage points of undecideds. But, you know, people know who Trump is. People aren't too sure who Kamala is. But I'd imagine right now most people are either going to be there, this side or that side, and that's really it. So I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact. In fact, I don't think debates rarely have that much of an impact. Most people go there it's like sport. They just want to cheer on their team and hope that their team wins.
Is special. The most consequential moment of this campaign. Kamala Harris.
Together, we will chart a new way forward.
Donald Trump.
We will soon be a great nation again.
Face to face. Historic.
I've always been confused by that saying, "Make America Great Again." He was in for 4 years. I mean, what was great about those 4 years? Was it that, and if it was so great, is he going to argue it was so easily undone? Well, that's never made much sense to me. Make it great again. Like, this is your second attempt at this. You already tried it once, you know?
The ABC News presidential debate. Here now, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Good evening, I'm David Muir, and thank you for joining us for tonight's ABC News presidential debate. We want to welcome viewers watching on ABC and around the world tonight. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump are just moments away from taking the stage in this unprecedented race for president.
And I'm Lindsay Davis. Tonight's meeting could be the most consequential event of their campaigns, with Election Day now less than 2 months away. For Vice President Kamala Harris, this is her first debate since President Biden withdrew from the race on July 21st. Of course, that decision followed his debate against President Donald Trump in June. Since then, this race has taken on an entirely new dynamic.
And that brings us to the rules of tonight's debate. 90 minutes with 2 commercial breaks. No topics or questions have been shared with the campaigns. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions, and this is the clock. That's what they'll be seeing. 2 minutes for rebuttals and 1 minute for follow-ups, clarifications, or responses. Their microphones will only be turned on when it's their turn to speak. No pre-written notes allowed. There is no audience here tonight in this hall at the National Constitution Center. This is an intimate setting for 2 candidates who have never met.
President Trump won the coin toss. He chose to deliver the final closing statement of the evening. Vice President Harris selected the podium to the right.
So let's now welcome the candidates to the stage.
You
Vice
always want to
President
have the
Kamala
final
Harris
say.
and
If you when it comes to debates, you always want to have the final say, because you want to be the one that says the thing that people, it's the thing that's going to stick in their mind last, and it also gives you a chance to kind of hear everything and counter that. So it is the most powerful position to take. Is if you have the choice, you want to go last. You want the final say.
President Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Okay, so she went in for the
Welcome to you
handshake.
both. It's wonderful
Okay.
to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue
don't
that
quite
voters
think
repeatedly
thoughtful
say is their
works.
number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country.
Okay.
Vice President Harris, you and President Trump
A
were
global
elected 4
problem,
years ago,
cost of
and your
living.
opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid, and I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
Okay.
I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine
this is
and
more
have
her
actually a
opening
plan to
statement.
build
She's
what I
not
call an
answering the
opportunity
question. She's
economy.
just giving
Because
her
here's the
opening
thing. We
statement.
know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to startup small businesses.
That's pretty good, actually. That is pretty good. And also the child tax credit as well. If there's one thing I think countries need to do more is focus a little bit less on what's to do with voting. Older people vote, and so older people get all the goodies, basically. Younger people can't vote, so they're often left out. So you require a lot of political will to get in things like child tax credit or nursery care or things of that nature from the state because they don't vote. No one really cares. So introducing that, I think, is a very good thing. More countries need it, quite frankly. The cost of raising a child is very expensive.
Knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for
tariffs.
tax cuts for billionaires.
Yes, tariffs.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that.
Well, it's not entirely incorrect. I mean, that's what a tariff is. You're placing a tax on the sale of a good within the United States, assuming it came from outside the United States, and companies will pass taxes and expenses on to consumers. It's a tax. That is literally what it is. It is a tax on goods, on foreign goods coming into the country, by definition.
We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay.
So he's basically saying it's not a tax. It's not a tax. It's a tariff. But a tariff is a tax. It's the same thing. It's a tax on incoming goods.
Us back for all that we've done for the world, and the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions.
Well, the primary reason for the tariff on China is because China massively subsidizes a lot of its industries. I mean, massively subsidizes. So it throws off the market. It's like, there was an issue in Europe several years ago where Chinese steel was basically being so subsidized and flooding the market that it drove the cost down. So places like the UK, for example, couldn't compete and steel mills started shutting down. In situations like that, you need a tariff can be useful because it at least tries to level the playing field. What Trump's basically proposing is just a general tariff on everyone. I'm assuming I don't know. I don't quite know what the economic reason for it. He seems to think it'll fund things, but it's not it's not a free money printer. It's like you put a tariff on something, costs will go up. So whatever money you're taking in, you're losing a chunk through cost of living.
Billions of dollars from China
It's why, generally speaking, people don't want tariffs. They want free trade.
and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a global problem, though. That's the thing. It's not unique to the United States. And the United States is doing a lot better now. Their inflation rate is dropping faster than other countries. But it was a global phenomenon. I mean, we can get into it more later on, but long story short, if you collapse production, you've got a bottleneck in production, which, guess what? That's what COVID did. And then you have a bunch of people with very cheap debt because interest rates are low, massive amounts of borrowing, huge amounts of spending. I mean, you've got people stuck at home with nothing to do but shop on Amazon or buy wood to build extensions to their houses. This is the sort of thing that happens. This is why it's a global phenomenon. It's not down to any specific issue with the United States. It's just the economies were shut down and people were spending. Prices go up. That's how it works.
This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that Xi and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country.
As an immigrant myself, I don't like the anti-immigrant push. There is a need to manage borders. There is a need to make sure they're secure. There is a need to make sure that things function and things are smooth and there's an order to it, and that people are checked and people are just make sure there's no serious security concerns. I do know in the United States there is a problem with the border, large numbers of people, but I know that it's also primarily down to the process. There just isn't enough judges. There aren't enough border guards. There isn't enough. The system itself just isn't. It needs more investment to make sure that when people come in, they can be processed and trained and checked, and that you don't have multiple years of people waiting to see a judge to see if their asylum claim is good or not. That's often what happens. I mean, we have a similar thing here where if you're granted, okay, you have a status which you have to wait and see. There's a time you have to wait before you can get checked to see if you're ready. But if you leave the country, you lose it. You have to go right to the back of the queue. So the incentive structures are kind of out of whack, and that does need to be addressed.
They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history.
See, I don't like that. I really hate the populist push of if you're an immigrant, therefore you are by definition a monster. I really don't like that. It's not helpful, it's not practical, and it doesn't actually fix the problem. It just stokes up resentment for political use. It's a way of getting votes. That's all it really is. It doesn't address anything.
Of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to let Vice President Harris respond on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess. What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us, and I pledge to you.
I mean, Trump says he has nothing to do with 2025, so he's going to deny that here, which is fine, he can do. My only question to that is if that's the case, why are so many people who he's around and close to and work for him now, who he's picked, why did they have their hands on it? Now, I mean, ultimately, from what I understand, it is just a policy recommendation. But it's I understand completely why the Democrats are like, okay, we're gonna use this and push it. Because why wouldn't you? People around Trump have endorsed it, have put their name to it, etc. So of course you're going to use it.
To be a president for all Americans.
President Trump will give you a minute here to respond.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people.
Yeah, not reading something doesn't mean you're not connected to it. You know? Like, I don't have to read something to be like, someone goes, here's an idea we have, what do you think? Oh, I like that. Okay, well, I don't want to read it, but cool. I get the idea. I mean, bear in mind, Trump was the person who wanted, like, his intelligence reports done in, like, small note forms, just, like, super basics, like, sort of point by point by point, just to sort of get through things quickly. So I'm not surprised he hasn't read it. I don't know if he's read it or not, but I'm not surprised. But that doesn't mean he's not connected to it in some way.
People that got together, they came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before. We had the greatest...
If he's an open book, why has he shown his tax reports yet? I don't think he has.
Economy. We got hit with a pandemic. And the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died.
Right, okay. See, this is the thing. He will refer to the pandemic in this situation because he's right. I mean, when it comes to things like health, when it comes to the economy, it was hit by the pandemic and he was in charge of the first part of the pandemic. So he's correct in saying this. What he won't do, though, is when it comes to questions like inflation, he'll immediately blame that on Biden, despite the fact that inflation is a lagging indicator. In other words, it happens after the fact. The event happens, inflation starts afterwards. So you'll see inflation after the catalyst that triggered it has already taken place. So the catalyst was COVID, which was during his administration and also some of Biden's. But he'll throw it all onto Biden because the timing of when the inflation really started to bite wasn't till a couple of years after the fact. So, yeah.
Been anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic. We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in.
Yeah, of course it was higher. Trillions of dollars were thrown into it. It's also worth pointing out the market, I believe, is up like 20% so far, now. So the market's not doing too bad because there's still plenty of capital out there. But make no mistake, the reason why the US, the capital markets were so high, the stock markets were so high, is because people were literally throwing trillions of dollars into it. People at home with nothing to do but gamble on Robinhood, doing options. That's, the Federal Reserve being the buyer of last resort, guaranteeing the buy, making sure that there's always someone there if people want to take their money out. It's what they did to stop the crash. That's why it happened. And I guess if he wants to claim credit for that, he can do. But it wasn't just him that did it. This was a Fed decision, and it was a decision all over the world. Central banks all over the world did the exact same thing.
Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible.
That's true.
People give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things, but not enough credit for the great job.
He could take credit for the vaccines, but he won't because he knows his base is very anti-vax right now. The Republican Party has just gone way off in the deep end on their anti-vax nonsense. So he could say Project Lightspeed, I believe it was, Warp Speed, but he won't. Despite the fact that the vaccine was an incredible thing. It was an internationally organized effort to create a vaccine as quickly as possible, and it worked. But he won't claim credit for that because, again, it's not politically good for him to do that for his base.
Job we did with the pandemic. But the only jobs they got were bounce-back jobs. These were jobs bounce back, and it bounced back, and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
So Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse, mine would strengthen the economy. What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession.
That is true. I mean, the United States does do a lot of internal production, but a lot of it does come from outside. It really does. And the reality is, if the United States places tariffs, especially 20%, 10%, 20%, I think 100% in some cases on, goods and services coming from outside of the country, that will throw up prices massively. Companies and countries are not just going to swallow it. They're going to try to pass on as much as they can to the consumer. That's what they do. As part of the reason why Republicans typically were pro-free trade and wanted low taxes, because they wanted, one, companies and American companies and stuff to be in good shape, and two, they wanted to make sure costs were as low as possible. And you don't keep costs low by throwing on massive taxes, especially on tariffs. Tariffs are a tax. That's literally what they are. It's a tax. It's a tax on goods.
You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
It's just a soundbite. They gave her that to say. Look, I went to the Wharton School of Finance, and
probably is a
many of those
soundbite, in
professors,
fairness.
the top professors,
But
think
they've
my
both
plan
got
is a
soundbites,
brilliant
so-
plan. It's a great plan. It's a plan that's going to bring up our worth, our value as a country. It's going to make people want to be able to go and work and create jobs and create a lot of good, solid money for our country. And just to finish off,
If tariffs were so good, then why did the globe basically post-World War II decide to start bringing them down? There's a reason they did that. It wasn't just to be spiteful. There's a reason they did it. It's because frictionless trade keeps prices lower and helps benefit the middle class. That's it.
she doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan, and it's like 4 sentences, like run, spot, run. 4 sentences that are just, oh, we'll try and lower taxes. She doesn't have a plan. Take a look at her plan. She doesn't have a plan.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this, because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here.
He shakes his
on
head,
foreign
but that's
imports
what it
across
is.
the board.
Tariffs
You
are a
recently
sales
said that
tax.
you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this
Okay,
country.
up to 20%,
As you
right,
know,
okay.
many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer.
Yes.
Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing,
Yep.
medication.
Anything
arguing it
coming in.
costs the typical
Anything
family
and
nearly
everything coming in. If it's a
$4,000
tariff
a
on
month.
it,
Do you
price will
believe
go up.
Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries. And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration. We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars.
The tariffs on China are there primarily for political reasons and also defense reasons. It's primarily about the fact that they don't trust China, and it's understandable why. China rips things off. They don't have copyright protections. They steal things. They often do. Things are often very heavily backed by the government as well. So in those particular circumstances, you have a skewing of the market and a national security risk. You can place tariffs. That's kind of what makes sense. But you do it under those circumstances. You don't just do it to placing massive tariffs on Canada or the EU, for example. All you're doing then is isolating allies, and all you're doing then is basically, like I said 1,000 times, increasing the cost for the American consumer. That's what you're doing.
I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country.
Okay, it's not like flicking a switch. The catalyst for inflation. COVID happens, everyone's at home, getting free cash, rates are super cheap, everyone's money is dirt cheap, everyone has access to it. Everyone's spending, they're stuck at home, they've got nothing better to do. You have a bottleneck in production, factories are closing down, workers aren't going to work. Bottleneck in production, massive amounts of spending. What happens? Prices go up. But that trend takes time. It takes time for the market to catch up to the fact that there's demand here, there's demand here, there's demand here. There's not enough stuff. Oh, prices have to go up to try and find an equilibrium, to try and find a balance. Okay? That takes time. It's not like flicking a switch. That's not how it works. Okay, the catalyst for the starting of inflation started under both his administration and the start of Biden's. But it wasn't like their specific policies caused it necessarily. It was just a reaction to changes in the global market. That's it. It's why it's everywhere. It's why every country is struggling with inflation. Because every country did the same thing. Keep people at home, give them money to spend so they can afford to eat and keep a roof over their head. And, because no one's working, production shuts down. That's it.
Because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else.
Yeah, it's bad, but it's global. It's not a specific Biden thing. It was a global issue. Everyone was talking about it beforehand. Everyone was saying, like, when it first started out, okay, this is not going to be good.
People of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
Vice President Harris, I do want.
Yeah, if you'd ask people, was the Obama economy good, or compared to this one, they'd say yes, because prices were still lower. Because the problem wasn't necessarily the policy. The problem was COVID massively disrupted the global markets. There was tons of cash pumped into the economy, and people were staying at home. Lots of money to spend, bottleneck in production, result, prices go up.
I want to ask for your response, and you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has.
Well, the reason why Taiwan makes the chips is because they basically have the technology to do it. The United States doesn't. So that's the reason why, basically. So companies like NVIDIA do the I guess the more lucrative work, the work where they do the designs of the chips, and then Taiwan makes them. Now, the United States could make them here, or could make them in the United States. That's true, but it takes a long time. Like it takes a very long time to move large-scale lines of production, especially when you talk about something like that. It takes decades to build it up. I mean, that's basically what the CHIPS Act was. What the CHIPS Act was for. It was to try and renationalize or basically build local manufacturing for high-end processors. Hopefully it'll work, but we'll have to wait and see. But for Taiwan, it's also a national security issue. Like for them, making sure that they keep themselves high up guarantees that, like, hey, you guys need our technology, so you better look after us. Yeah.
Has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got a...
That's not entirely true. I mean, the United States has for quite some time now, been moving away and becoming more protectionist, slowly but surely. So I don't necessarily know how true that is. But yeah.
Elected, she'd change it, and it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist.
Oh,
Her
there we go.
father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done
Just
to
because
our
you
country,
teach
and when
something
you
doesn't
look at these
necessarily mean that's
millions
what
and
you
millions
are.
of people that are
So,
pouring into our country monthly,
I mean, if you taught,
where it's, I
like,
believe, 21
I
million
don't know,
people, not the
the
15 that
history
people
of,
say.
the
And I think it's a
Nazis,
lot
that doesn't
higher
make
than
you
the
a
21.
Nazi, does it?
That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals. And that's bad for
And
our
there's the
economy, too.
anti-immigration
You
note
mentioned
again.
before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane. Almost policy that you'd say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lindsay?
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade. Last year, you said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history.
He needs to be careful here. He could lose the women.
Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. But then the very next day, you reversed course and said you would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women should
6-week ban is terrible. I hate to say it's terrible. It's like most women don't even realize that they're pregnant at that point. They don't. For most women, when there's a telltale sign that something's different is when, you know, they're late on a period. And then they're like, oh, I better check. Okay, 6 weeks is terrible. It really is terrible. It's basically an abortion ban for all practical purposes.
shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed
A full abortion ban.
your position so many times. Therefore, why should they trust you?
Well, the reason I'm doing that vote is because the plan is, as you know, the vote is, they have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical.
I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. No, I genuinely don't think that's true.
Than that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it.
I mean, I don't think any states allow that, but the only situation I can imagine where something like that would happen, it wouldn't be out of convenience. It would be because, like, the mother's life is the mother's basically at serious risk of death, and something needs to happen. It's not going to be, oh, I've changed my mind, I don't want the kid anymore. In which case, it would be a medical decision. So it would be effectively between the woman and the doctor. But I don't even know if it happens. I mean, if it does, that must be so rare.
But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother.
Does his VP? I don't think his VP does. In fact, I seem to remember correctly, Vance was talking about perhaps a federal ban on women flying out of states where they can't get an abortion in order to get one, and sort of saying they might do something to make that illegal. So you're no longer allowed to travel if you're a woman who's like potentially pregnant in the United States. You can't travel between states. I remember hearing him say something about that, which is kind of crazy.
I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions, very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar,
He has got
every
something of a
Democrat,
valid
every
point there. He
Republican,
does.
liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. Now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was
What's
somewhat liberal,
needed
much more
is
liberal than
Congress
people would have
to,
thought. But
and
each
President, quite
individual
frankly, to decide to
state
create
is
and sign
voting.
a law
It's the vote
that
of the
makes
people
it.
now.
It
It's
says,
not tied
okay,
up in
this
the
is the
federal
law
government. I
in
did
terms
a
of the
great service
nation
in doing
for
it. It took
abortion.
courage to do it. And
Because right now they don't have it, and so it was all down to a legal decision, Roe versus Wade, in the Supreme Court, which I don't believe. I think it was based on privacy. It was a privacy question, if I remember correctly, and there's always been contention on it, always between the left and the right in the United States. So what's needed is like an actual agreed upon law, where it's like, okay, boom, that's the law, it's done. Whether they'll get that through or not is another question entirely, because, as has been said, it's kind of similar to what they did with the gay rights. You know, Biden signed a law basically protecting it. That's what, because originally the law was done by the Supreme Court, so the Democrats panicked and were like, okay, we better make this into law, and they did. And there was a lot of Republican support too, because Republicans acknowledged the fact that, hey, look, just because you're gay or whatever, just because that's who you are, there's no reason to strip you of your rights. And that was a proper thing to do. So there would have to be something similar to that, but for abortion rights. But that's a completely separate thing, and the country is still very, very divided on that.
And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Okay,
Madam
that is
Vice
it,
President, I
right.
wanna get
I
your
knew it was
response
something
to
like that.
President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got
Ooh.
here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers
Yeah, she's
are
gonna be
afraid
strong
they
on
might go
this.
to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot.
Because it's a very emotionally
She didn't want
charged
that.
subject. You can
Her
really
husband
push.
didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term? They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages. I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Thank you, Vice President Harris.
Well,
I
there
agree
she goes
broadly.
again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else,
Well-
and every legal scholar.
He says that, but there is a push within the Republican Party for a national ban. And I believe his VP pick, Vance, I believe, has said that he agrees with it. So we'll see how that plays out.
Wanted it to be brought back into the states, and the states are voting. And it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart. And they've
He is right there. This was never settled, ever. So it does need to be a democratic question, which is ultimately why it has to go through, the Congress, and it has to be signed by the president,
wanted it
as opposed to just a Supreme Court ruling.
back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came
Well, I
to your
won't
desk?
have to because, again, two things.
Doesn't quite answer the question there.
Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote.
And he may be right about that. I don't think they would. Although we'll see. We'll see.
Especially now with the 50-50, and essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up being a total catastrophe. The student loans, and then her, I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach. But look, her boss went out
Didn't
and
you
said,
spend a lot of
we'll
her
do it
time
again.
golfing
We'll do it
or
a different
something?
way. And he went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea. And how unfair that would have been, part of the reason they lost, to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free. But they were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D. And I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look, we don't have to discuss it because she'd never be able to get it, just like she couldn't
Some
get
problems
student
on the
loans.
home
They couldn't
front
get student
between
loans. They didn't even
the
come close to getting student loans.
ex-president and his
They
VP
taunted
pick.
young people and a lot of other people that had loans. They can never get this approved. So it doesn't matter what she says about going to Congress. Well, wonderful. Let's go to Congress, do it. But the fact is that for years they wanted to get it out of Congress and out of the federal government. And we did something that everybody said couldn't be done. And now you have a vote of the people on abortion.
Vice President Harris, I want to give you your time to respond, but I do want to ask, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion?
I absolutely support reinstating the protections of Roe v. Wade. And as you
Just say it's got
rightly
nothing to do
mentioned,
with her, and it's
nowhere in America
basically between the woman and
is
the
a
doctor.
woman
That's what it
carrying
is.
a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women
Yeah,
of
it
America.
is pretty crude
and
to say
understand
that.
what has been happening under Donald.
No one's demanding that their fully termed baby is killed. No one's. It's not like done from convenience. If it's ever done, it's going to be one of these situations where the mother's life is like, okay, you will die if we don't do this, and we have to prioritize the mother in that circumstance. It's not convenience. It's not, I've changed my mind, I actually don't want a kid, get rid of this thing for me, please. It's not that.
Donald Trump's abortion bans. Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments. What is happening in our country? Working people, working women who are working 1 or 2 jobs, who can barely afford childcare as it is, have to travel to another state to get on a plane sitting next to strangers to go and get the health care she needs. Barely
That
can
is a
afford
lot
to
of
do
pressure
it,
to
and what
place
you
on
are
a
putting her
working
through
woman. It really is a lot of pressure.
Unconscionable. And the people of America have not, the majority of America.
I wonder, and I'd love it if she asked the question, but I highly doubt she would, is if she asked him, how many women have you escorted to get an abortion during your time? Because I'd find it very hard to believe that, like, he hasn't, what was it? It was fooling around with, like, a porn star or something. Yeah, that was it. It was a, Stormy Daniels, I believe, fooling around with a porn star while his wife was pregnant. So I even remember a few years ago there were jokes about this made on a talk radio where they were saying about, like, Trump's idea of abortion is, well, the guy's, probably walked a number of women to get abortions during his time. So it'd be pretty funny if she asked him that question, because that does make him something of a hypocrite.
Americans believe in a woman's right to make decisions about her own body, and that is why in every state where this issue has been on the ballot, in red and blue states both, the people of America have voted for freedom.
Vice President Harris,
Excuse me, I
thank
have
you.
to respond. Another lie. It's another lie. I have been a leader on IVF, which is fertilization. The IVF, I have been a leader. In fact, when they got a very negative decision on IVF from the Alabama courts, I saw the people of Alabama and the legislature 2 days later voted it in. I've been a leader on it. They know that, and everybody else knows it.
Did he lead on that?
I
What does he
have been a
mean?
leader on fertilization, IVF. And the other thing,
What's he actually done to
You
lead
should
on
ask.
that? That's an honest question.
will she allow abortion in the 8th month, 9th month, 7th month?
Come on.
Okay, would you do that?
Just say it's got nothing to do with me. It would be between the mother, the mother and the doctor. Fundamentally, if the woman's life's in risk, if she is going to die, if there's a very high chance she'll die, and there's a question that needs to be raised there, then it's a tough question. But I guess that'd be my answer to it.
Why don't you ask her that question?
Why don't you
That's
answer
the
the
problem.
question? Would you
because
veto?
under Roe v. Wade,
Answer the question,
you
would you
could,
veto?
Yeah, okay,
you could
cool.
do
Push back, push
abortions
back.
in the 7th
So
month,
both
the 8th
basically
month,
kind of
the
dodged
9th
the
month,
question on
and
that one. Both
probably
dodged
after
it.
birth. Just look at the former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said, we put the baby aside, and then we determine what we want to do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important
Oh, I bet Trump's been waiting for this topic.
to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage.
Super short answer as to why it took so long. If I had to guess, because they realized it was becoming a serious political issue and they needed to do something about it. Yeah, that would be my answer. You know, they knew it was becoming a problem. They knew the Republicans were using it. They knew that people were following them and going towards Republicans because of this issue, and they had to change their mind. That'd be my guess.
Who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And
True.
that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the
True.
border to help
Very,
those
very
folks who are
true.
working there right now overtime trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl
Very
coming
true.
into the United States.
All
I
true.
know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know
And
what
I
happened
wonder
to
who
that
killed it.
bill? Donald Trump got
There
on
we
the
go.
phone, called up some folks in Congress and said, kill the bill. And you know why?
He needed it.
Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
That is true.
And understand, this comes
did that.
at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
That's exactly it. He needed a problem to run on. He needed a problem to use. He needed talking points. The last thing he wanted was that fixed before the election.
And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual.
Well, it is
and
one of
I'm
his
gonna
main
invite
talking
you
points.
to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's
Oh.
a really interesting thing to watch.
Oh,
You
no.
will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies
Oh,
early
no, going
out
for
of
his ego.
exhaustion and boredom.
Oh,
And I
they're
will
going
tell you,
for
the
his
one thing
ego.
You will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about
He
your
is
needs,
not gonna
your
like
dreams,
this.
and your desires.
He is going to hate that. He is going to hate that. If there's one thing Trump hates, is being told that people are bored of him and aren't paying attention. He loves being the center of attention.
And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have
I'd
put
love an
thousands
answer
of
to this
additional
question.
Agents and officers on the border.
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies.
Of course, of course. Out of everything that was put forward, it's the rallies. Why? Because he needs to be the center of attention. Basically, what she's saying is how dare you say that I didn't have the audience numbers? That's basically it. How dare you suggest that I don't have an audience, that my numbers weren't the best, they weren't great, they weren't fantastic. But please push him as to why he stopped that bill. It's a well-known thing. He did stop the bill. I really do want to know. Because maybe he has a valid reason. But it looks like the reason he did it is because he needed something to run on.
Said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go.
Is he going to start talking about AI? Well, they're all fake?
And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there.
Okay, right. So they're actors, basically,
showing
right?
them in a different light. So she can't
It's
talk
pretty
about that.
crazy.
People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies,
There he
the most
goes.
incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done
Bouncing
to our
around a bit.
country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
Okay, that's
and
crazy.
It's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase.
Okay, I think that Kamala's comment about people leaving Trump's rallies has him flustered, and so right now he's just wailing. Because that was nuts, quite frankly. So, just so I'm clear, there's a mass amount of migrants in places like Springfield actively going around hunting people's pets and eating them. I mean, is there any truth to this? I mean, hopefully the moderator can fact check it. I'd love to know the answer to that.
Make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people.
So he saw someone on TV. Did he check it? Or did he just watch it and it was like, oh, I'm going to say that? What does it mean he saw someone on TV? I mean, okay.
People on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
but
television.
But the people
I'm taking
on
it from
television
the city
saying
manager.
their dog was eaten by...
So he watches TV, a person says something, he doesn't check it, but he decides to bring it up during a debate. Okay, that was a crazy moment.
The people that went there.
Again, the Springfield City
He sounds flustered right now.
manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice
We'll
President
find
Harris,
out.
I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme. This is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if you
you want to know who someone is, talk to the people they work with. You want to know what someone's really like, have a conversation with their ex.
didn't make it.
Because it's a big question now. Why do the people who used to work with Trump not want to work with him anymore? Why are they always the best, fantastic, brilliant, and then a few days later they're useless and crap, and that's why they were fired? Either he's bad at picking people, or he does things that screws things up. It's one or the other. Either he's incompetent at hiring, or he's a crap boss.
Clear already. Just ask people who have worked with him.
Right, exactly.
His former chief of staff, a 4-star general.
And the only response he'll have to this is they were just all bad. Well, if they were that bad, why'd you hire them? You're the one doing the hiring. Are you that bad as a hirer? Can you not tell when you hire someone how good they're going to be? Do you have that poor of a track record?
Has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the Republic, would
Mention Vance. Mention Vance. Mention the fact that a mob went after him.
never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond
Yeah.
here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people, not so graciously. They did bad
Sorry,
things
not
or a bad
Vance.
job.
Pence.
I fired them. They never fired one person.
That's embarrassing.
They didn't
Yeah.
fire anybody having to do
Ask
with
Pence.
Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people whose were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire them. And you take it.
Or you send a mob after them. To be clear, you either fire them or you send a mob, some of whom call for the person to be killed, after them.
A guy like Esper, he was no good. I fired him, so he writes a book. Another one writes a book, because with me they can write.
Isn't it crazy how all of these people that you hired, who you thought were amazing when you hired them, all turned out to be bad? And I think the factor that unites them all is the fact that they couldn't. It's insane.
Books with nobody else can they? But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire.
They're great when they're saying yes to you, but when they turn around and say no, we can't do that, you fire them, because what you want is only people who will say yes to you, which is why you're here now losing your mind.
Anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have.
Yeah, economists don't create inflation. Okay, inflation happens within the economy. I've already talked about how you get inflation. You can't just magically go, I'm firing you and now the inflation's going to go away. The only way once inflation starts to really slow it down is to slow down the economy, because you have to crush consumption. You have to stop people from consuming. So you have to start a recession. That's basically been the dance the Fed's been doing this entire time. It's like, how do you keep rates at just enough so that you have the economy moving, but you're bringing down inflation? The only other way to really bring it down, and I'd be curious to know if that's what he would do, what Trump would do, is you have to crush consumption, or you have to massively boost production. But that's expensive to do, and that takes time. So it's easier just to stop people from buying things.
Books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any sitting president in history by far.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S.
With local
military.
police, yes.
You also
That's crazy to me. I mean, just imagine like the police going down your street, house by house, pulling people out, tearing apart families. That's insane. That there has to be a better way of doing it.
said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million
Oh,
undocumented
will he
immigrants? I know
answer
you
this question?
believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah. It is much higher because of
Was that yes, I'm going to answer it, or yes, they'll be going door to door? What was that yes to?
them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country. And they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down?
Okay, you're supposed to be answering a question on what would the process be for removing these millions of people, migrants within the United States. and we're talking about Venezuela. Like, no, what would you do? How would you do it? It's an important question because it will affect American lives. Okay, people will know someone. People will, work with someone. People will be married to someone. People will have a family with someone. It's an important question.
You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes. But it's not worth it because they're destroying the fabric of our country by.
Yeah. Non-citizens can't vote.
What they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof, despite their fraudulent statements that.
I don't think that's true. I think even the FBI's own numbers say that's not true. Unless, of course, the argument is that we'll just don't believe the FBI and whatever Trump says is fact. I mean, is that the word? Well, maybe it is. Well, I guess we're about to find out.
They made crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse me,
President
the
Harris,
FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't.
Oh, they were
include
lying,
the worst cities.
right?
They didn't include the cities with the worst crime.
It was a lie
fraud,
by omission.
Just like
is what
their
they're
number
saying.
of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear, where
they're all
each
fake,
person
right?
stands
Is that what their response
on
is?
the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete...
I think the reason for that, it wasn't having the documents that was the problem. It was the refusing to give them back when requested, from what I understand. So it's not quite the same thing.
Total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick
They're
response
all lies,
Vice
huh?
President Harris on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Everyone's out to
Well,
get me.
let's talk
That's his
about
argument.
extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again.
True.
Understand, this is someone who has openly said.
Well, it
he
wouldn't
would
just be
terminate,
him, it'd be
I'm
you as
quoting,
well. It would be
terminate
whoever-
the Constitution of the United States.
That's true. It
That
would
he
anyone in the
weaponize
office.
the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, it wasn't, the Supreme Court didn't give Trump specifically those powers. It was the power for the president. So it's the power belongs to the office. So if she becomes president, she has those powers also. But it does set a dangerous precedent, and it's very, very problematic. Basically, we now don't know where the limits of the president is in terms of criminal conduct and what makes something criminal, and can the president even do something illegal. A bit more to it than that, but that's the general question now.
Disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guard.
See, I remember watching a debate a while ago with Glenn. Who was it now? Oh, what was that guy's name? I can see it. It was. I'm going to press play and I'll get back to it.
Rails. Because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people.
Vice President
stop
Harris,
him.
thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris.
There we go. Yeah, Glenn Greenwald. Yeah, Glenn Greenwald was saying that the reason why January the 6th wasn't a coup, from what I remember, is because there was no military involved. And unless the military is involved, it's not a coup. The problem with that is now based on the Supreme Court's ruling is that had President Trump got in contact with the army in an attempt to kind of, take over the United States, I don't know whether or not that would necessarily be illegal, or whether or not that would be something he could be prosecuted for, because the President of the United States has the right to talk to generals, has the right to, he is the liaison between, the public, between the civilian side and the military side. That's his job. So talking to generals, sort of saying, I think there's a political attempt to, he would basically argue, there's a political attempt to take the election from me. I believe there are bad actors in play here. As President of the United States, it's my job to protect this country, and so I want to install the military in place until we've figured all this out. He would absolutely have the right to do that. And that is basically the sort of playbook of military coups. There's corruption, we're going to go in, we're going to take things over, and we're going to install calm and stability. And the problem then is that it never stops. Whatever the coup is, it generally doesn't end. The military stays in power, or the president stays in power, or the general stays in power, or whatever.
In your last run for president.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy.
Well, if you attempt to stay in power even though you've been voted out, then that is kind of an issue, my boy.
The fake Russia investigation
We do have a lot
that
to get.
went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
Because she needs the votes. Either that or she really has changed her mind, but it's also entirely possible she just needs the votes.
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss every one of at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking, because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States, and in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote.
I don't think the President of the United States has the authority to ban fracking, so I don't believe they do.
On the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking.
So saying I didn't ban it whilst I was VP is like, well, if you can't do it, then, I mean, fair enough as a statement. And she is saying here that she was the tie-breaking vote to kind of open things up. So maybe that's what she means.
My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil.
That's a valid point.
We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then
Ooh.
file bankruptcy 6 times
Ooh.
is a value that I bring to my work, to say we are going
Again,
to
making it
work
personal,
with the private
digging in
sector
there.
and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your
Well, first of
response?
all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into...
Okay, please ask the follow-up question if you can. If it wasn't 400 million, when you said, was it like, what, 100 million then? Was it 50 million? Like, when you say a tiny fraction, how much are we talking here? Because I guarantee it wasn't just $1,000.
many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
Oh.
She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did
Oh, you
things
see,
that
that she had to
nobody
calm
would ever
herself down
think of.
then.
Now
She
she
came,
wants
like,
to do transgender
like that.
operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish, one thing so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times.
Yeah, oil demand started increasing. You have to bear in mind, like, during COVID, oil prices practically collapsed. Although, in all fairness, before COVID, there was the situation with Saudi Arabia. So maybe it's to do with that as well. Could be. What was it? I think Trump released the oil reserves to try and stabilize prices. I think that was what happened. I could be wrong, but I think that's what happened.
4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to...
Well, no, demand started to come back, and so naturally, as demand improves, the market goes up to meet it. But it's not... I mean, oil production in the United States is the highest it's ever been. That's just a fact.
destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead. We'll go back to windmills, and we'll go...
No, it won't. It won't. Okay, so much of the world is still dependent on it. It won't. It's ridiculous. What is important is to have, like, a mixed portfolio of energy where it makes sense. So, wind farms where it's windy, solar power where it's very sunny, so Southern California, things of that nature.
Back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that
for
we
the
have to get
environment,
to.
as
We're
she
out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to
Getting
talk
close.
about peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television.
Okay, it's going to bring up that I said peacefully and patriotically. Okay, here's my problem with this. If I was to say, for example, I don't know, I love my wife. Okay, I say I love my wife, right? And then later on that day, while I'm watching TV or while I'm just looking out of a window, I see a group of people start harassing and wanting to beat up my wife. Okay, and I have friends around me and I have work colleagues around me, and they're all saying, hey, yo, someone over there is beating up your wife, or someone over there is harassing your wife. You gonna go help her? And I'm like, I'm not sure. She probably deserved it. Okay? And I don't do anything. I sit there for hours watching this happen to my wife. Okay? And then only at the end, when, I don't know, my daughter asks me to do something about it, I basically go, hey guys, maybe it's best we stop. You know, we love you, but maybe it's best we stop. You're going to question whether or not when I said I love my wife, if I actually loved my wife. That's why I don't believe him on this one. That's why I don't. Because he said it, but his actions suggest something entirely different. Okay?
Off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not
right,
later
there you
on.
go.
Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But
I love my wife, but I'm going to sit back and watch people harass her for hours and do nothing about it except watch TV and drink a can of Coke.
we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar. Remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, well, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet. That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted?
The border does need to be addressed. It really does. It's a massive political issue, and the sooner it's resolved, the sooner, things can start to come down. The problem is that, people move through borders. I'm an immigrant. I've lived in a couple of countries. I live in the country I currently live in right now. I'm a migrant here. People still need to move. People, jobs, family. It's borders are quite porous. What they need is control, though. That's the key point here. Control. We need to know that people coming in are being checked and being screened and things are okay. That it's safe. Otherwise, you get this, populists basically exploiting it for personal gain.
One of these people from countries all over the world, not just South America, they're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world. And crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just
one
ask
of those, David, one of those people are going to be
Is
prosecuted.
he basically saying that the rest of because all the criminals are going to the United States, that there is no crime anywhere else? Or crime everywhere else is dropping because of it? That's pretty crazy if that's what he's suggesting. That really is crazy.
The people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted, or in Seattle. They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
Okay, the reason why there's a political difference is that none of those were the president of the United States. Okay? And yes, I believe there were prosecutions too. People were arrested. I mean, a lot of that, there was a lot of political nonsense. This is shortly after, the person who was knelt on by the police. I cannot believe, I can see it, I can picture his face, I just can't remember his name. But yeah, this was the aftermath of that with the riots. Yeah. That was pretty crazy. Very politicized.
But let me just ask
You might ask her that question.
You were the president.
George Floyd. There.
You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other
Of
than
course.
they asked me to make a speech.
Whoa, 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 whoa. They asked him to make a speech? They asked him to... I'm going to rewind that.
In Seattle. They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask
You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said,
They asked him. They asked him? No, mate. They were only there because of you. I mean, it's talking as though, oh, I was casually walking around and I said, hey, why didn't you say a thing or two? Bro, you were the one pushing for it. You wanted that speech there. You wanted to be there. You wanted to have that rally. It was all about you. They wanted him to make a speech. Jesus.
I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just too...
I don't think the Speaker of the House has the authority. Plus, not to mention the fact, bro, you're the President of the United States. So what are we saying here? That, like, he went to Nancy Pelosi and said, hey, could I have this, please? And she was like, no. You're the President, bro. If you thought you had the absolute authority to do that, you could have done that. And here you're talking as though, like, oh, I was just there. They asked me to make a speech. I don't know what was going on. I said, oh, this could be quite big. Do you think we need more people? But they said no. Like, I mean, do you have any autonomy in this? Do you have any authority in this? Or are you just a hapless victim walking through a crowd, one all confused and not sure what the deal is? That's insane.
2 weeks ago, her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy...
You're the President of the United States. Okay? Fundamentally, if you're there doing something...
Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic
I wouldn't go
hate.
down this line.
And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side.
Okay, that's...
Let's remember that when it came...
Okay, yeah, I don't like that one because I'm pretty confident that's not what he was saying. That there is definitely an argument to be made there that is not what he was suggesting. However...
to the Proud Boys, a militia.
Okay, now this is different. This is his fault.
The former president said, stand back and
Stand by. Yeah.
So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was...
I remember watching that debate and him saying that and literally thinking, okay, that's crazy that he just said that. To the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And I think they even tweeted afterwards saying, you know, standing back and standing by, basically. Like, it was wild. It was crazy. They literally thought to themselves, okay, we're like the president's private militia. It was insane.
I say, we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect.
Okay, well, that's the Fox News lot, so they're going to have Trump's back anyway. Although, yes, it is worth saying that his thing, there are good people on both sides, was not in reference to the anti-Semites walking around with tiki torches. It was not in reference to them. I believe it was a conversation about a statue, and it was a lot more nuanced than that. So Trump gets props here. It was kind of silly bringing that one up, although it's probably trying to appeal to a wider audience and trying to push it out again there. But like I said, it's a debate. It's mostly theatre. But the stuff about the Proud Boys, yeah, that was not good. And that was on Trump. And he did say that. He could have easily said, yes, I disavow them. Yes, I think, I don't want this. Or he could have even turned around and given the argument of, look, this has got nothing to do with me. People who support me can support me. It's not up to me who supports me. He could have said that as well. But he didn't. He said, stand back and stand by, which is a very, very, very peculiar thing to say.
It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this. You talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything?
And back to immigration again.
And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because
They did try to sign a bill that would have assigned more aid to the border, more judges, more staff, more monitoring, more checks. Speed up the application processes, speed up all the documentation process, get the system moving, and you told the Republicans not to go for it because you needed the political talking point. So why you're bringing this up now, I don't know.
The right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The President of the United States, you'll get him out of bed, you'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, look, the president can close the border, but the goal here isn't to shut the border down. You need a functioning border. Okay? You need a functioning border. And the problem is also the people already in the system is making sure they're processed, making sure things move. I mean, there are legal norms. Claiming asylum's a legal norm. Applying for a visa is a legal norm. These are things that need to be dealt with. You can't just go, we're shutting down the border. You can't do that. It has a function. It has a use.
You'll say, come on down to the office. Let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed.
Mr.
Those
President,
people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue to both of you because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate,
is he going to concede
you
here?
have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
Right.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
Oh, okay.
Sarcastically, you know that.
Okay.
We said, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it, and they should have sent it back to the legislature.
His Department of Justice, the judges, the people around him. Was it Bob Barr? All of that. all of that, all said the same thing. The states themselves did their own investigations and were like, no, we're good. It all runs smoothly. 1 or 2 issues, but it all runs smoothly. No problems at all. And he still denies it. Either the guy's a liar or is incompetent. It's one or the other. You know, it's wild to me.
Legislatures for approval.
It's crazy.
I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten. The election, people should never be thinking about.
Yeah, but it's first past the post, so it's like it's not you don't go by popular vote. You know, if more people vote, then you get more of a spread, so you've got to have larger numbers. But it depends by who gets it. It depends on who passes the post first.
About an election is fraudulent. We need 2 things. We need walls. And we have to have it. We have to have borders, and we have to have good elections.
Immigrants can't vote.
Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't
How? To vote, you have to be a citizen, which means you're no longer an immigrant.
even speak English. They
Well, I guess you are. You're a naturalized immigrant.
don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them
No
Republican.
judge looked at it.
And said
They
there was
said
no
we didn't have
widespread fraud.
standing. That's the other thing.
Not having standing is basically saying that there was no harm. There's not enough evidence that there was a harm done. You have to have a case. What they're saying to you is, you don't have a case. Okay?
They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing, the president of the United States?
Well, there's also another question there is, can the president take the states to court because the states have their own systems and that you wouldn't necessarily have standing there? But the broader point is that to have standing, you have to be able to demonstrate harm. You have to show that a harm was done and done specifically to you. And if you can't do that, then you don't get. There is no court case. The courts don't just arbitrarily try. Go, okay, you think you have something, we'll try it. That's not how it works. You have to pass a burden first to demonstrate that there's harm done, and there's enough. You have to demonstrate there's harm. In a nutshell, that's what you have to be able to do, and you have to be within the jurisdiction as well, which I think is the issue when it comes to the federal government versus the states in terms of elections. Almost broke that. Careful.
States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people.
Ooh.
So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate
You could question
to my
his
right,
cognitive
the
ability?
temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact.
Oh.
That's deeply troubling, and the American people deserve better.
Ooh.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond, Mr. President.
Let me just say about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's
Viktor, okay, for those who don't know, Viktor Orban is the head of state for Hungary. Okay? He is an autocrat. I mean,
he's a tough person, smart. Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up 3 years?
That's amazing. So of all the people you could have mentioned, of all the major US allies, you don't mention the UK. You don't mention the UK Prime Minister said this. You don't mention the Germans, the French, Norway, Sweden, Spain. None of that. The country you reference is Hungary and Viktor Orban. Wow.
Years ago it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president. They were afraid of him. China was afraid.
I mean, he may as well have just said, we need, I spoke to Nigel Farage in the UK, a UK MP, and he thinks that I'm fantastic. He may as well have said that. Nuts.
And I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him. China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him. I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one, but he ended the XL pipeline. The XL pipeline in our country, he ended that. But he let the Russians build a pipeline going all over Europe and heading into Germany, the biggest pipeline in the world. Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no...
That's the sort of thing he would say, though. That's just who he is. He's basically referencing like a very strong, what's the word I'm looking for here? An ideological friend of his and quoting them. It's like I literally sort of said it. He may as well quote Nigel Farage.
No problems when Trump was president, but when this week...
Or Le Pen. Someone like that. Basically anyone on the hard right.
Pathetic man that you saw at a debate just a few months ago, that if he weren't in that debate, he'd be running instead of her. She got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office. And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her. But he got 14 million votes.
What is this, school?
They threw him out. She got 0 votes.
They're all gossiping
And
about
when
you
she
behind your
ran,
back and don't like
She
you.
was the first one to leave because she failed. And now she's running. I don't understand it, but
Mr.
I'm
President,
okay with it
Mr.
because
President, your time is
I
up.
think we're
Thank
going to
you.
do very well.
We've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now
Yes.
to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian
Fair.
law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would.
Yeah, any country
And how
would
it does so
under those
matters.
circumstances.
Because
Every
it
country
is
on the planet
also
would
true,
would
far
also
too
seek
many
to defend themselves.
Innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers.
Yeah,
What we know is that this war must end.
yeah. There needs to be an end game. Ultimately, there needs to be a political solution for this. The problem is that like for this is hard to say. Anyway, I won't get into this now.
It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
Oh, I'd end the conflict in 24 hours.
If I were president, it would have never started.
Oh, that,
If I were
okay.
president, Russia would have never.
So basically, he doesn't have to answer the question because he just goes, well, if I was in charge, it never would have happened, so there. Like, that's not... No, what would you do, bro? Talk.
Ever. I know Putin very well. He would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years, have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you added.
That's not entirely true. I mean, Russia had gone into Georgia, it had gone into other countries as well before then. They had also gone into Crimea in 2014. So I'm not quite sure why we're saying like there was no sign of it. I mean, there were signs, there was movement. So that's a peculiar thing to say. There was definitely a change. There was definitely a movement going on. It wasn't like everything was all hunky-dory. I mean, there were fights in the Donbass. There was, depends who you ask, I guess it did a revolution. You know, don't sort of saying like everything was great when I was there in charge and everything was perfect and there were no problems. That's not true. That is not true.
It up far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one.
Okay.
She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population.
How does that work?
The whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel.
So basically, 2 years after, assuming she wins, the entire Middle East is just going to explode? Because she hates them both?
Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation. And now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un.
That is true.
And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on
Vice
national
President
security,
Harris.
including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
And she's the one that caused it, that's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week, said, I hope she wins. And I think he meant it, because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me.
If I had to guess, the reason Putin's saying things like that is because he just, for him, it's fun. It's like, okay, I'm going to say this and I'm going to watch and see how they bat that around. You know? I don't actually think Putin really cares, in all honesty. I think what he's interested in is chaos and division. That's the goal. Keep people fighting amongst themselves.
The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made, Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe? Because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way,
President
gets paid
Trump,
a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National Constitution Center right here in Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
The ABC News presidential debate will continue after this.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there for now. I'm going to watch the rest later on. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Kind of what I expected to. Okay, cool. I'll have the next one out hopefully soon. I'm going to stop here. Take care. Bye. Like and subscribe if you can. Super easy. Just, push a button. Take care.